The Okay, it's March 21st special meeting discussing of real estate schools and course approvals. I guess we'll start out with Paul.
Well, good morning, everybody. So for those that don't know me, my name is Paul Grabowski. I've been on a couple meetings, but I'm a new staff attorney too at the Department of Consumer Protection, working in the professional and occupational enforcement area. So today's meeting and what prompted this is the department's met internally a few times about our real estate education, pre-licensing and continuing ed course approval requirements. And really what we were trying to do is figure out if there's anything that can be improved for efficiency purposes and just to ensure that current processes are compliant with the law. So in doing that, I took a deep dive into the statute and regulations, right? And the regulations really haven't been updated in a meaningful way since 2004. So you can imagine that there's a lot in there that needs to be updated. And in that process, also looking at our forms. So on our website, we have school application forms, course application forms, and instructions. So we're really trying to do a comprehensive analysis of all those documents, looking at the statute, looking at the regulations to see what might need to be done. So today is intended to be really an introductory conversation around those things and the issues that we found, and taking a look at those and what might need to be done. So to that end, I know Terry Jo sent around a memorandum. It's about a page and a half that covers some big issues that we found and some recommendations, as well as a copy of relevant statute and regulations for both pre-licensing education and continuing education. Those go into more depth. You can take a look at all those things. But today, what we want to do is take a look at this memorandum, walk through this a little bit, kind of in a big picture way, talk about these issues and some issues for immediate action, things that can be done as far as the application process itself and the forms. And then really walk through, attached to this memorandum are two checklists. That's kind of how this all got started. Said, well, why don't we start looking at some checklists that might be able to help Jill analyze the applications a little bit better. So I did put together a couple checklists that include all the requirements under the regulations for pre-licensing and continuing education. But one thing that I think could really help improve our internal processes is if we get some feedback from the commission today about the required documents that are in the regulations. So and we'll get there, but go through those documents and talk about what standards they might need to meet, if there's anything additional that should accompany those, because really, all we can do is see, hey, is it received? And Jill might need a little more guidance on some of those documents to see, if they are appropriate or not, or if the course should be denied. So that's what I wanted to do today and accomplish today. So I think we can start by looking at this memorandum. And Terry Jo, if you could just scroll down to the bullet points under the issues, there should be 6 bullet points there. And these were the big takeaways that we found, looking through the statutes and regulations. So first of all, regulations really do not establish a distinct school approval process that's separate from the course approval process. If you look at those regulations that are in that separate attachment, what you see is that the school approval process, and Terry Jo, I don't think you don't need to worry about flipping back and forth. If we have to, we can later, but I don't think we need to right now. Thank you. So if you look at those regulations, what you see is that the school approval process really is the course approval process. It's all about what you have to submit for your courses. It would be good to have 2 distinct processes. And one of the themes that you're going to see in all this is that it would be very helpful down the road, potentially in statute changes, to say, well, a school has to be registered in some fashion with a clear next bullet point, the clear expiration period, something that we don't currently have. There's actually not in statute or regulation clear expiration periods for the school requiring renewal or for the courses. And that's an issue because right now, what we have is we do have a document posted online that's called the course application instructions. And those course applications instructions say that the courses expire every 4 years. Well, that's not listed in the regulations anywhere. So that's something that really will have to be taken on down the road. Okay, so the third bullet point. So this is what I'd like to dig into a little bit later on. The course approval process requires applicants to submit a number of documents. There's quite a few, but it's really not clear. It's not spelled out in the regulations or statute what standards some of these documents must meet or what level of review they should receive from the department. So we'll go through some of those items later on, and we'll see if there's some clarity that maybe the commission can shed. And that would help, really help Jill process these applications. Because right now it's essentially, have you submitted this document? If so, your course can be approved. But if we can flesh that out a little bit, I think that would be very helpful. Another big problem is that the regulations really do fail to include sufficient authority to discipline these schools, whether it's revocation, suspension, a fine. There's a little language in the continuing education regulations that talk about withdrawing a course application, but there's not much in the pre-licensing, and really it should be more fleshed out than it is. And that ties right into potentially a registration requirement of some sort. For example, the real estate appraisal schools have a very clearly articulated process in their regulations. You know, you register as a school, then you submit your course application. It's very clear. That is not the case on this side of things. That's something that could use clarity. I know this issue has been brought up in the past, and I don't want to harp on it today, but really the statute and regulations do not adequately define distance education. I know that's been gone over, and I know that I know we don't need to beat that to death in any way today, but changes down the line should spell those things out. And then just a lot of technical issues with the regulations, because there are two sets of regulations. There's pre-licensing, and then there's continuing education. Now, right, pre-licensing regulations, they were both updated in minor ways in 2004, but pre-licensing hadn't really been updated at all since 1978. So there's a lot in there that's out of date. CE, a little further down, had some amendments made in 2004, 2002, and I think in the mid 90s as well. But what you have are a bunch of inconsistencies between the two sets. So for example, appraiser schools are not a prohibited location under the continuing education regulations. Continuing education requires a fire marshal to approve all locations, whereas pre-licensing does not for certain locations. Record retention requirements are different under each one. So these are all inconsistencies that'll have to get ironed out. It would create a very, getting rid of those will create a clear regulatory scheme, right? That's kind of what we would like, something that's as clear as possible. So that's really condensed and boiled down to what we see as some of the bigger issues. Those are the 6 kind of big issues. So if we could just scroll down to number 1 there, Terry Jo, some recommendations. So really, first step, right, making sure our forms are up to date, looking at what the regulations require, and making sure our forms encompass all of that it's in one place on those forms. That's something that can be accomplished rather quickly. Right now, what you see is there's one form for both pre-licensing and continuing education, and it doesn't very clearly distinguish between the two. It's just, here's your required documents, and then it also has required documents for course renewals, which aren't necessarily accurate with what the regulations require. So these forms do need to be updated, definitely. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, and this is getting to the checklist, is really clarify the application review and approval.
Oh, can I interrupt you for a second?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Just check on, because there's a hand raised.
Okay.
I think Commissioner Berquist has a question on something you just said.
Yep, let's do that. Yep.
Hi, I had a question on the bullet points above. Is there, and I'm guessing the answer to this is going to be no. Is there any standard that schools have to follow for the instructors they hire to teach these classes? Like, does an instructor have to have a certain credential of something, like they're a licensed real estate agent or broker?
So this is an area where, again, the regulations are in need of update because
Okay, all right. So that
the
would,
regulation is actually out of line with the statute. There was an amendment to the statute in 1984. I tried looking for some history on this, but the statute essentially says that the regulations cannot require approval of an instructor. However, the regulations do have standards for instructors.
the qualifications. Okay,
There
all
are qualifications. Yeah.
right. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Okay, so to number 2 here of recommendations, clarifying the application review and approval standards. So hopefully today we can go through these checklists, look at these documents and see what recommendations the commission has for different standards of these documents. So we'll get into that, but that's, so for example, it's things like lecturers guidelines, something we currently don't require to be submitted, but is required under the regulations. Well, what should we be looking at if we're looking at a lecturer guidelines? That's the kind of area where we might be able to get a little more input from the commission that would help Jill determine if that course should go forward or not. And then a really big change that would be very helpful for the department would be to implement online applications. Right now, we have our PDFs that they download from our website, and those are emailed or faxed to Jill, basically, to the email address that she oversees. Most all other applications of this nature go through our e-licensing system. And what's great about e-licensing, so I did a little fiddling around with this, right, to see, how the appraiser course works. If you don't submit certain documents, you don't go to the next step, right? So this ensures that everything that Jill needs to make an evaluation will be submitted. It provides absolute, real clarity on what you have to do as an applicant. That's why we think going to the e-licensing system is really a move that should happen sooner rather than later. Okay. So, and then finally, more long-term, looking at the legislative session in 2023, right? Trying to get any necessary changes into statute, right? Some legislative recommendations together, and then looking at updating regulations potentially after that.
One question about that. What happens, I was doing an e-licensing module, and at the very end, there was a glitch. And I had done everything, and it said, nope, I couldn't make it work. I screenshotted it, I emailed it, and it was accepted, but it also equally could not have been, or I might have not been far enough along. And what happens in those cases?
So that would be something where we'd have to, on the back end of things, talk with the tech staff to see. Someone would have to call in and check, and we'd have to check with the tech side of things to see where that application went, and if it would have to be.
I mean, my fear is I don't want to create undue burden where someone does 90% of the course and has to start again from the very ground up. That's my only concern with that.
Yep, understood. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so those are the 6 items, and then the 4 recommendations. So I think before we move on, if we want to open that up to more questions at this point, it'd be a good time to do that.
Oh, I just want to say, one thing is that to start off with is that all of us, I think, on the commission really feel that over the years, we really weren't acknowledged on certain things, which is okay, because I think the department tried to make it, they were short-staffed, and they are short-staffed, and we understand that. And they took it upon themselves to took this responsibility, which in turn is what we're trying to do also, is to make life a little easier for the department, to make this one smoother. So some of these glitches is going on, probably Jill is gonna say, hey, listen, this is, we can make this one much smoother. That's what we're also looking for, is to make this thing run a little bit smoother than what's going on. All of a sudden, the last few years, I've been on the commission now 22 years. And at the beginning, there wasn't really much. We once in a while, someone would come in front of us and say, we didn't have the 10 days and we don't have time. We need a course to be approved. Can you do it? Can you do it at the meeting? And we did. But very little we were involved in, as far as not knowingly that there was problems behind the scene. We're here to support you.
I appreciate that. I'm sure Jill very much appreciates that. Yeah. And I think, part of the issue is in these pre-licensing regulations, there needs to be a clear appeals process as well for denials, right? If something does get denied, it needs to go before the board, and the regulations don't spell that out either. So there's just a lot that needs to be updated and changed. And hopefully, as we continue with this, we continue to get commission feedback and work to make the best process possible. Okay, any other questions or comments on what we've gone through so far? I see Cindy's hand is up.
Just want to congratulate you, Paul. It's a very good presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there are several things in here to review as well. For example, why should every school have to do PMP? I think originally that was in there to be sure there were enough PMP classes, but there are many CE schools that may not want to ever do PMP, and we're sort of forced to do it. And it's not even clear if you can partner with another school if you have no intention of being a PMP provider long-term, but you're just doing it to meet the requirement. That may not be necessary. And I agree with you. I think there's a whole list of things that you want included that aren't timely when you get a course approved. For example, marketing material. A lot of times a course may be approved months before you actually offer it, so you don't have the marketing material yet. Or if an instructor gets sick and you have a backup, how can we reasonably do all of it? And I know there's instructors that regularly switch up their slides. Are you allowed to? Can you add content to an approved course immediately before the course or not? And to Amy's point, it would be hard if every instructor had to be approved. For example, we don't do many courses, but when we do, we may use an expert. Like we're doing a crumbling foundation course, we may want someone from the Department of Insurance there. Well, they're not a licensee, but they would still have expertise on concrete foundations that might be important to the course. So I think there's a lot of details throughout this entire document. And I agree with you, Paul. It's so incredibly outdated. Like some of this stuff you should never need to know. Even details such as why you can't do it. Why do we have 3 hours instead of 2? 3 hours is a long attention span. Some instructors really struggle to add content to the last hour. If they could have accomplished something in 2 hours, we try to we've even thrown in completely different content to fill the third hour sometimes. But I think there's a lot of areas, even beyond all the ones that you highlighted, that need to be looked at.
I think that's very true. I mean, you could go through this thing in even more detail, and certainly there are things that we're not going to pick up on that the profession will, do they need to do the PMP as well, right? Is there a need for that? I think that's, as we look at updates, I think all those things will probably be evaluated. This is just the kind of the big picture discussion. And I do think also that the timing of the submission of documents, right? You have that weird 10 days prior sort of thing. Does that really make sense? It doesn't seem to, right? And in reality, like you said, the marketing materials, when are those going to be produced by the school? When should they be submitted? What do we really want? That's something we talked about with Jill, is what do we really need on that side of things for marketing materials? So agreed, there really is a lot here. But again, this, initial discussion, try to get the process smoothed up for now until some bigger changes can be made.
I had a couple questions, Paul. First of all, it's really nice to meet you. I'm really excited that you're in this position, and you sound like you've got a great handle on it already. So one of my big concerns is distance learning. The CE shop being one of them. I'm a big fan. I know opinions vary. My experience, and I used them as recently as this year, I needed to take an ethics class to remain a realtor. Not with the state of Connecticut, with MLS. So in any case, I have found, my experience has been that it's very good. And it permits people, I don't know that everyone has access the way I do. I don't know people's physical bodies. I don't know, the different abilities that people have. And one of the things that's so important about distance learning is it makes learning accessible to people of all abilities and of all walks of life. And I do want, that to be available. And I did have another point about that that I'll come back to because I'm not recalling it right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a big area that needs to be clearly articulated, right, in the regulations. And there are good models out there from other states that talk about asynchronous versus live virtual and really spell out. So if you're going to come up with an asynchronous program that you're okay with, right, what does that mean? When are you checking in? How often are the quizzes? That sort of thing, to make sure you're getting that level of education that you want. So there are models out there that can be looked at, and that's definitely one of the next steps when we're looking at putting something together. Will be, what do we want? How do we want to define that?
And it's interesting, you're right, because the CE shop, it is all asynchronous. They don't offer live virtual. So I understand right now you need 12 course hours. You know, the CE shop can offer 6, and the other 6 you have to do through Zoom elsewhere. But my experience with it is that it is a thorough testing. That's what I was going to ask about. The questions, and I don't know that we're dealing with this now, the questions on the exam, many of them I don't like because I feel like they're trick questions or asked in a tricky way. And I don't care how smart people are. I'm not interested in smart brokers. What I'm interested in are ethical brokers and ethical salespeople. I want people who know what is right and what is wrong and who try to do the right thing. And you know, I don't love the test is my point for the, you know, for the exams. I don't know if we're touching that.
Yeah, I think that's good to know, because copies of the final exam are one of the required documents that we're supposed to be receiving. And it's one of those things where, you know, how should we be evaluating that? What should Jill be looking at? Should we approve or deny this? So I think, you know, if there's any more general questions, we can take those now. And then I think we can turn to those checklists and talk about some of those documents. Oh, I see Cindy's hand is up.
Yeah, I have just one more, which is people who test out of CE. I don't know if any of that covers the mandatory course content or not. I know you can go to PSI and just take an exam and not do the 21 hours at all. And I don't know if that is regularly reviewed for content or ease or time, or if it even covers an ounce of the mandatory stuff.
That is something I do not know. Yeah, I'm not sure what level we look at what PSI, you know, what the testing is on that. It's something we can probably take a look at. Okay. Okay, so with that, Terry Jo, if you want to pull that document back up, the memorandum. Okay, so this is the pre-licensing course application checklist list, the draft that we came up with here. So again, these are pre-licensing courses, and you see, you know, right away here, one of the first requirements that Cindy touched on, right? The applicant has to offer at least 3 courses required to meet the minimum broker's qualifications. So that's in there, that's in the regulations, you know, that's what's required right now. So that's kind of an initial starting point. But really this next checkbox with all these are the documents, and you know, it's a little dizzying. There's a lot of asterisks here. That's because there are some documents that aren't on the current form, the application form. They're just not on there. And then there are some documents that are on there, but they're under the wrong area. They're under the course renewal section. And then some of these documents are on the application instructions themselves, but they're not on the form, which, you know, if it's a required document, it really should be on the form. You don't want people guessing as to where something is, right? So, and Jill, I think, yep, I was going to say.
I was going to mention one thing here with the pre-licensing offering at least 3 courses. That's directed towards the broker's qualification, because the brokers have to take 2 15-hour courses or the appraisal course. So that's what that is. That has nothing to do with CE. Just to be clear.
Right. Okay, so back to these items that we have here under the second checkbox. So, and Jill, where you want to, if you want to, you know, point out what you're getting now and looking at. So like, for instance, number 1 here, detailed course outline. One of the things, Jill, that you said that you look at is you like to get a timed outline, right? Isn't that what we request?
Yeah, because a timed outline is, I mean, this is pre-licensing, so we're looking to fill those 60 hours outside of the exam.
And I don't know if
Yeah,
there's
and
any,
Paul, I just want to add, if you do a timed outline, how timed, like every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 15, every 30. I mean, I think it's helpful for those of us who are filling it out to know how much time how narrow you want that to be.
that's the problem with something like that, is you can get so super specific, right? You can drive yourself crazy.
I've done every 3 and 5 minutes. I'm sure
Well,
others may do every 30 minutes.
What I generally see is like topics, like we're talking about this is going to take, 20 minutes. It's not, some of them are very small, 5-10 minutes. Some of them are bigger group, like I'm going to spend an hour on this. So I've seen everything, because there isn't a defined
Well, and
requirement.
there's no defined requirement in the regulation that it even needs to be a timed outline, but, right. Well, does anyone have any comments
Yeah,
on
so
that?
Paul, it would be super helpful if we knew for sure as course providers, if we do or don't need to give a timed outline, and if we do, is it every 10 minutes or every hour? Or something else?
Yeah, I do think there needs to be some clarity, right, in the application itself that says it's going to be timed. How are you going to time it, right? Broken out by what section or whatever it might be. Yeah.
I have a question for Cindy. Cindy, in doing that, would that be course specific, do you think? As far as the outline, as far as the timing of it?
Not
You think we could do that
necessarily.
on a generalized?
Yeah, because let's say I'm going to do an hour on fair housing laws. So I'm a 5-minute person. Every 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 10 minutes, I have every single slide broken down, but I could just as easily, and it's obviously time consuming to do that. And then instructors are like, oh my gosh, I have to cover this in 3 minutes and that in 4 minutes, because they're basing it on how I time my teaching. So even one student asking a question is going to throw the timing off, based on the instructor in the class. So I'm guessing each of us does it differently. Some people may just say, I'm going to spend an hour on, covering fair housing, or an hour on the code of ethics, and then an hour on the standard of practice, and then an hour on something else. So, I mean, it could be done any way.
So rather than course specific, it would be instructor specific, is what you're saying.
No, I think it's tough to do it the way that I'm doing it and handing it to multiple instructors, because
Okay.
I'm timing it based on when I teach it and my timing. But even if I were to teach my own course, any given class could throw my timing off just based on a question, or people having more examples or whatever it is. If you narrow it down to the 3 minutes like I do, or the 5 minutes. But I think for instructors that do it by the hour, I didn't even know that was an option. Or not doing a timed outline at all, then I think there's a lot more flexibility with how your course runs.
Cindy, what kind of, what has the instructors been saying regarding that time-wise?
I don't think they do, Ben.
They don't, no.
Yeah, I think that it's not checked into, and I never really knew what to put. I've just always narrowed it as deeply as possible.
Have they complained about it?
Jill would know that more than me. And no, they wouldn't complain about it.
No,
'Cause people don't turn themselves in. They wouldn't say, oops,
Right.
I missed the whole last hour. I get more concerned when people finish early. It's like, how could you possibly finish early on something that I have to cram every, talk at my lightning fast speed? So, I mean, there are instructors that finish any given course, not ours. I'm just talking about any general even courses I've been in, and they have 20 minutes left, and they just kind of who has any questions? Where if you looked at their outline, there's not 20 minutes for Q&A.
Right. And
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sitting at a class, monitoring a class and looking at their outline schedule. I mean, I think it's just to make sure they're covering all the points. So you itemize everything out. And yeah, there's going to be questions, and you might run over on this segment, but then something else might go a little quicker. It's just getting all the time in. It's just a way to verify that there's actually 60 hours. Everything's going to add up to 60 hours at the end for the pre-licensing.
Right. It doesn't seem like it needs to be broken down by 5-minute increments, you know.
No, I
it
wouldn't
could-
think.
Yeah, could be much more general than that. And maybe that's something we'll have to come up with language around to specify so people aren't driving themselves crazy trying to time out 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever it is. Okay.
I mean, even if you're on an asynchronous class and it's time, you know, they give us a time schedule. If you can't get past that next section, then it slows down. I mean, people read at different levels, so it could take somebody an extra half hour. I mean, somebody that teaches that could probably, you know, speak on that topic or writes those courses, but I'm sure some people it takes longer to get through. I don't think it ends at the end. I'm not sure.
Right. And that's why it's more of a general, right, timeline, right, broken down to make sure, like you said, Jill, make sure you get the hours. Even in live classes, we all know it's, if you have an audience that's super chatty, a lot of questions, you know, there's like a hour, half hour deviation sometimes, if you're, even if you're really pinned down on what you're doing. Okay. So then there's one item, the next item is instructors lecture guidelines. This is something we're currently not requesting at all. It's not on any of the forms, but it is required under the regulations. So I don't know if, Jill, you have anything to comment on that, or any other commission members on what we might be looking at with these guidelines, because we're already requesting an outline. I'm not quite sure, and I don't know that Jill is either, what a guideline would be.
It's a difference.
Maybe it's like a table of contents or something. This is what I'm going to cover, but I mean, I don't know. I really don't know what that is.
I think it's usually a facilitator's guide in other contexts, right? Whoever's the instructor is, here are some additional notes and resources to reference when you're talking through the topics.
I don't know if that's necessary. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something to evaluate, you know, when things get amended down the road, or when we suggest revisions, but it is one of the required documents for now. So we have to put something out there. So whatever explanation, you know, we can tie to that to make it clear what we're looking for would be helpful. Facilitator's guide. Okay. As far as the copy of text and teaching materials, the third.
Before you go any further, Paul, can I just
yeah.
interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah, definitely.
So I'd really encourage the commission members to really provide some input, if you have any, for each of these things as Paul goes through, because what we gather today is going to help to inform us as to how things should change. So for instructors lecture guidelines, any other input on what you would be looking for, what you think that should be, whether you think that, I mean, right now, because it's in the regulations, we have to require it. So what would Jill be looking at? What should people be submitting for a lecture guideline? Any more input on what that would look like?
Just a comment, if it's a redundancy of the course outline, if that's basically what we're saying, can we just eliminate that, or do we have to go through a process to do that?
Yeah, that would have to be done through regulation changes. So it can't just be eliminated right now. But
Isn't the entire purpose of this to do regulation changes? So couldn't you just make that part of the regulation change when you propose everything that's going to come out of this?
Oh, it certainly will be, but that's going to take a substantial, it's going to take time. And ideally,
As in like 2023 legislative session?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So part of this is trying to figure out what we can do now, right, to make sure we're in compliance with what the law is. But certainly well noted that when we're looking at proposing changes, some of these things should be cut out. So that if that's the comment that you have today too, as we're going through this, certainly note that so that we can, take notes and we'll make sure that gets in there.
I think, Paul, one of the things is that over the years, we've added things. We've never taken or subtracted other things that is to eliminate.
Yes.
So I think one of the things we're trying to streamline some of the problems is occurring.
Yeah, like I don't think we should be creating extra paperwork just to create extra paperwork. So can you
Yeah.
can we define the lecture guidelines as an outline? Right? Like, so if it's something that has to be there, I mean, a guideline, frankly, to me sounds like an outline because it's saying everything that's being talked about in the class. So rather than make a school create 2 pieces of paper, just make them do 1. And I realize the asterisk one is one that's part of the state statute or whatever, so it's required. So just if we're able to define it as whatever we want, then just make it an outline.
Yeah, I think we could probably put something in there that says, any additional notes or like facility, I think we can come up with something so there's not too much more someone would have to submit if they've submitted an outline. But yeah, it is part, I don't know, Paulette, you have anything on that one that you want to comment on?
We certainly don't want it to be redundant at this point because, Jill's can be taking in this information. It's like if it's course outline and another, a second course outline, to me, that doesn't make any sense. So the lecture guidelines, I heard someone mention that it could be a facilitator's guide. So is there anything else like, Cindy, do you in lecture guidelines, like what would that mean to you or anyone else who?
Paulette, if I can share my screen, I can show them what it looks like on the bias course. That might be helpful to everybody. Okay, let me see. Okay, so when I submit the course outline, I would have timing next to all of this, like how much time I'm spending on each module, and I go very detailed into each part of it. When I give this to the students, it just says 180 minutes and it gives them this outline. So I think the decision would be, is this enough of an outline for 180 minutes or did you want something more than that? Again, this is not what we submitted. This is just what we've included with the students. And then as far as the instructor notes, you can see at the bottom, and this is, as Jeff mentioned, when we give the PowerPoint to the instructors, it tells them at the bottom what they should be saying, additional comments to include. So I may send in my PowerPoint, but when I send in my instructor lecture notes, it includes all of the information underneath it, which is what are you supposed to be saying to the students? Because most slides, like here would say impact of home ownership, but then like, what does the instructor do with it? And if you get my instructor notes, then you can see at the bottom what they're supposed to be doing at the end of the slide. After it asks the students, how have you expanded your practice? It tells them more about the course. So, it just depends on what you want to see related to it. Because if you just get my PowerPoint in the outline, these are heavily detailed outlines. But some of it you may just have the best practice is just have 2 or 3 words on a screen. This is really developed for a Zoom presentation. So it depends on how much you want to see about each course. I would think you would want my instructor notes because you would know more about what I'm teaching. I don't know if other schools agree with that or not, but they really are different things. The harder one for me is a textbook. Like, do you really want all of us to send in the Dearborn book? And if we're sending in the Dearborn book, if I don't use any book at all, wouldn't you have wanted my PowerPoint? And if you get my PowerPoint, do you just want the slides or do you want the instructional information that I put beneath it? How much? And then it gets back to then what does Jill do with it? Like, even if I send it all in, is she going to like reject slide 15 or something?
What if we were to combine the first 2? So course outline and instructors lecture guidelines into one bullet. And so then if, for example, Cindy, with your example, you'd send that one thing in, it has your guidelines on the PowerPoint. What about that? So then we're complying with the law that says both these things, but it could be just one submission. Thoughts?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think
Cindy, we can't hear you. If you could turn your mic on.
Yeah, so under the next one is related teaching materials, because I think that if you say lecture guidelines, there should be something that explains what that is. For example, your instructor notes on PowerPoint. So most of us who use PowerPoint know what notes are. And I'll ask Jeff if he does something differently with how you do the notes. Do you do yours in PowerPoint when you do video?
It varies. I know that there's one school that has their entire pre-licensed course in 300 plus PowerPoint slides. So they don't even use a book, and they fill each slide with a lot of text, but that's how they deliver in person and on live.
Wow.
And it works well for them.
okay. Another hand up.
Commissioner
I just want to add in, like Cindy stated, I'm an instructor for PMP, and I can't even imagine lecture guidelines for, we thought, so would that be for every chapter? I just would need some clarification on that, of what the lecture guidelines would be. Like I said, we go by the Dearborn book, page for page. So any input would be helpful.
Yeah, a lot of these schools don't use a PowerPoint. Like what Sharon was
I
saying,
don't.
they're just working out of the book. So that's not something that's probably as easy for a school like that to put together.
Then would you just say there are none? Instructor on their own?
I'm sure they have. I'm sure that if you've been teaching this a while, you just go on autopilot. And if you're in a subject, you just go off, you get out of the book and you start talking in real time about things that are going on to create some kind of communication with the students. Because I know the more they communicate back and forth, the more they seem to get it on some topics, right, Sharon? You're nodding your head.
Exactly. The more they interact, I think the more the class gets out of it. But to give an outline, it would be difficult because, you're talking about 60 hours with these students, and, no two sessions could, even to follow a syllabus, I have difficulty because it depends on the class. Are there 10 questions or are there no questions, or so to stick to the time frame is tough, but to do a lecture outline would be, I don't know, virtually impossible for me.
So I think Paulette's suggestion was really good, because if you combine it with the course outline, and then we put some clarifying language in here that what we want in maybe a lecture guideline is more general facilitator notes, if there are any, but not any, I don't think you need notes from each slide of the PowerPoint. I'm not even sure how, that we would have, how Jill would look at that and evaluate that. So I think combining the two, like Paulette said, means we keep it consistent with the regulation, but we put in some language there that those guidelines are any facilitators guides or notes, but we have to try to keep it general, I think. Because like you said, we'll drive ourselves crazy an applicant will drive themselves crazy otherwise. But I think that's a good start, is combining the two. Okay. And then as far as the text, I know Cindy mentioned the copy of text and related teaching materials. So currently the application requires a copy of, I believe, the cover page and the copyright page. Is that right, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if there's any merit to requesting more than that at this time or not, or if that's something we'd like to discuss.
Well, they're all used in the same book. It's the Dearborn.
And that's for pre-licensing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're still there. So the Dearborn, it's the 20th edition, I believe. Yeah, and then for the real estate law, it's the 14th or 15th, 15th. But they don't send the whole book. They just make a copy of the cover and making sure they have the right.
That
book.
seems
What about schools? Sorry to interrupt. What about schools that don't use the Dearborn book? It's more common in other states, but it sounds like if it's just, you should probably contemplate that in the language for the future. Because there are a lot of schools in other states that don't use the Dearborn, or there's like one or two other big publishers where, for example, one school uses just PowerPoint. That's it. They don't have an accompanying book because everything they need, the cover is in all of those slides. It's a heavy PowerPoint slide, but still.
Yeah, I think we'll have to think about what we want to request in situations like that, so that it's just very clear what we want for teaching materials. Now, Jill, it says related teaching materials. Do people provide copies of any handouts or anything else that they give, or is it really just the book?
It's really a copy of the book, the
Okay.
cover. Yeah, there's.
So for now anyways, it's just okay to keep the language that we have in the application that says
I think so.
a copy of the cover and copyright. Okay. So then the next couple points here, we do have a copy of the final examination on this list. And so that's where it would be helpful for Jill to have some guidance as to whether, what should she be looking at when she's reviewing this, or how should we take a look at this exam to make sure it meets our standards. I mean, Jill, do you look at it now? What do you do with it now when you get the copy of the final exam?
I mean, I go through it. I look at the final exam. I look at the questions. It's time consuming. I mean, I can't go through a whole, I mean, I know what's in the book, so their guidelines, their outline, actually, they hit all the topics going through the book. So I'm not, a lot of times there's exams at the back of the book. I don't know if.
Is there something we could use to streamline this?
I mean, I've seen exams that are 10 questions and I've seen exams that are like 30 questions. So, I mean, because in the past, I believe the commission, there was a person on the commission, Lana, that would review most of these courses, and I don't believe the previous examiner was reviewing all the courses. Can anybody speak on that?
No, I think we relied a lot on Lana.
All right. So, Terry Jo.
We have 3 hands raised at this time. Commissioner Rinaldi was first, I believe.
Okay, just to note that Dearborn provides the final exam with their teaching material. So that's where that comes from, directly from the book, and from, it's basically the questions from the back of the book as well. The practice exams. You changed the names, that's it.
Right.
We
Is
had
that the
Jeff
final
Weiss.
exam that people do with the state, the proctored exam that comes straight from the book?
No, I proctor it for the students. They need to pass that before they can get certified to take the exam, the PSI exam.
Yeah, the PSI exam was the one that I had the objections to, not this exam.
Oh, okay. Okay. That clarifies that. Yeah.
Well, but I agree on that. It's almost like you're not testing their knowledge on what they learned in the course, but yet seeing how wise they are to really interpret the question.
Actually,
know?
I took this book and I thought the book was terrific. I thought the self-tests were terrific. I thought everything about it. The Kathy Pankak, I believe, was the author of that one. It was fantastic.
Okay. Well, that makes it nice and clear for the pre-licensing anyways, that especially for examination quizzes and maybe even the grading system is pretty clear too then. Okay, so we still have hands up.
I believe Jeff Weiss was next in line.
Thanks. So to Peter's point, and then I have 2 points. To Peter's point about updating or the actual exam questions, every couple years. So I'm based in Massachusetts, which happens to be where Anita Hill, who wrote, I think, one of the books or many of the books, I'm not sure, it resides. And she joins the education committee meetings up in Massachusetts, which I also participate in. And every couple of years, they do a revamp of the questions for this. I believe it's for the state of Massachusetts. And I don't know if there's anything in the regs or if there's any procedure for reviewing the questions that PSI includes in their Connecticut exam, but that might be something to consider for the future. And through that process, to touch on Peter's point on helping to shape the direction of the questions. I don't know if there's anyone at the DCP that does that currently, but that might be worth reviewing with PSI, because I guess that's periodically done, at least here in Massachusetts. Maybe she does it for the whole country. I'm not sure, because her books are everywhere. I hear about it every so often that comes up. And then to Ben's question about, is there a way to streamline the application process as it relates to the structure of the course? So continuing ed courses have to be Orello approved. Or at least, asynchronous courses have to be Orello approved. Orello more recently has started reviewing and approving live courses as well. And one of their main goals is to make sure that the structure meets the content curriculum, meets the objectives, et cetera. So to take some of the administrative burden off of Jill, it might be worth taking a look at the Orellos, creating the live or pre-licensed course to go through the Orello certification process as well.
If I may, just for 1 second. So before we get to Terry, so I don't think Jill should be evaluating the content of the final examination. So I think we need to sort of like set a minimum thing that she should be doing. I mean, is it they submit it? Okay, I have them. It says final examination, move on. Because Jill should not have to be evaluating these.
No, and I think so. There was the clarity that these final exams, anyways, for pre-licensing, mostly come from that one book that everyone is using, the Dearborn. It sounds like. So as long as they submit a copy of it, there should not be much that Jill needs to do on these. So I think that the fact that they submit it should be enough on this.
Or should we just say that the final exam should be the exam in the Dearborn book?
Well, if everybody's using that book.
Well, everybody is using that book because that's the book that the state requires.
But do you see that people are creating their own exams?
I've seen everything.
Right. So to Paul's point, I don't think we should be requiring that it has to be a Dearborn final examination. Why don't we get to Terry? Because Terry's
that makes it easy if it's the Dearborn examination, because then you don't even have to look at it. You know that's the one.
What we're saying is that you shouldn't be evaluating them. We don't want you spending time.
I know, but that's what I mean. If it's stated that you would use the Dearborn final exam at the end of the book,
that's the other issue
then
here.
You don't have to talk about it.
The Dearborn, again, it doesn't say in regulation or statute that Dearborn has to be used. So we can't then say you have to use
all right.
that.
So let's let Terry, let's hear what Terry's got to say. His arm must be tired.
Good morning, everybody. I totally agree with what Paulette's saying, is we're putting too much on Jill, trying to have her approve final examinations. And if you just say it's the final examination from Dearborn, then everybody's just going to be looking, who's taking the course is going to go to Dearborn and see what the exam is before they walk in to take their proctored exam. But I'm not that concerned with the PMP, because you actually have a measurement tool for the PMP effectiveness for each school. In the past, we used to get a grading system on what percentage of your students were passing the PSI exam. So if it was less than a certain benchmark, then you could look back and say, what's wrong with this school? They're sending people and they're not passing the exam. So, I think Jill's got so much on her plate that really reading through all the PMP stuff, you're going to measure it. You can't measure the continuing ed. There's no tool for measuring continuing ed and the effectiveness, but there is a very, very strong tool. I don't know if PSI still provides the report cards on the proficiency of the different schools teaching PMP.
I don't know that, but I do know that I did get some numbers from licensing on the like year to date. This was just March 4th. So for salespersons, it's like 43% passed the first time.
So when we used to, I believe it's still on there, when I would teach my course, when you go to sign up for the PSI exam, you need to put in your school code. And then when we had the instructor seminar twice a year, they used to hand out on paper your grades for each school. So then I would know that my school, the Andover school, we had a 83% pass rate for the first time through. So this way the state could actually measure each school to see what the effectiveness is, not throughout the entire state, but let's look at each school. And I know that if my school's at 40%, well, then I need to pay some attention to what is that school teaching? If mine's at 85%, then move on. I don't think Jill has to spend a lot of time with that.
No, I would like to see those numbers myself.
Yeah, I think we'll have-
PSI does provide that in other states.
Yeah, I think we'll have to check with PSI and see what information is available to us. It sounds like it is available, so I don't see why it would not be made available to the state. So I think that'd be a great tool. Definitely a great tool. Okay, so I think we can.
Question.
Yeah.
When is PSI's contract due?
Just renewed it last year. Just
renewed it. How many years is it for?
I don't know. I'm not involved in that process, but
Yeah,
I believe we renewed it for 3 years this round.
Attorney Grabowski, we've had Commissioner Burnham with their hand up.
Okay.
This goes back to about 15 minutes ago. I'm ignorant about Arillo. Could you define that for me? I need to understand what Arillo is.
Arillo is an acronym for something that's similar to Association of Real Estate License and Law somethings. They're a third party that came out of nowhere like 5 or 10 years ago, maybe, I'm not sure. And a lot of states are using them to ensure that the structure of their courses, of their continuing ed specifically courses, the asynchronous ones, are structured appropriately. So for example, in order to go through that process, your instructor has to be, another acronym, IDECC approved, which is like a $400 or $500 process. And I forget, it's been a while, 12 to 18-hour course that you have to complete. And they teach you about best practices for teaching and different ways that people learn. And it is actually an educational experience, probably made me a little bit of a better instructor learning about those things. So the states require that a course be Arillo certified. And in order for a course to be Arillo certified, it has to have an instructor that's IDECC certified. And within those course requirements, there are things like you have to have stated objectives in each module, a certain number of them. Within each quiz, you have to map the questions in your quizzes that are required to the objectives to make sure that what you're talking about and what you're asking about meet up. There's requirements on everything from like the clock enforcement, which I think we've discussed in the past here, to how many questions are required per hour. So they basically take all that administrative burden. So if you see a certificate from Arillo saying this is Arillo certified, you're pretty sure that these items have all been checked off, which is, I think, back to Ben's point about making it more efficient, which is currently, I believe, the requirement in Connecticut for continuing ed is that your courses are RELO certified to take that burden off. So extending that to the pre-license might be a good step in the right direction, but it also might require a lot of instructors to go through that IDECC certification process. So you're just adding a little bit of time and cost to the instructor side, but I think in general, it probably improves the overall instruction of the course.
And a RELO is required for distance CE courses in Connecticut. So yeah, that is required to be submitted with their applications. And a RELO has, you can see everything they require. If you go onto their website, you can see this massive PDF. I think it's 100 pages, you know, of all the different requirements that you have to meet to be certified by a RELO. So there's a lot of information out there, and we can look at that for pre-licensing as well when we talk about revising things. So I know Paulette has her hand up.
So just looking forward in terms of regulations, change in regulation with respect to copy of final examination. Is that something that we still want schools to provide or no? Any input on that?
Well, we don't call out the Dearborn book in the regulation, right? So you can't say the final exam.
Right, but what I'm asking is, when we go to draft new regulations, do we want this as an item that the schools produce? A copy of the final examination? Do we want to still collect that or no? This is for the future.
I say yes. Yes.
I would suggest collecting it, but if you're going to go there, if you choose to go the route of the RELO certification, you can be more certain that the level of questions are matching what are the topics that are discussed, et cetera. So you might not have to have Jill going through the questions to see if they make sense or if they match up. But also circling back to, I think, Terry's point about the report card and checking on schools that don't have good reports. I was looking into getting my private pilot's license, and in order to sit for the FAA exam, you have to be sponsored by a certified instructor. And if that instructor is pushing too many people through the FAA exam process that are failing, their instructor license goes into jeopardy. I don't know if that necessarily correlates directly to real estate, but that could be a direction that might be interesting for real estate as well.
All right. So yeah, I think final exams could continue to be requested in the future, but we might, you know, make it pretty clear we're not going to be looking at every single question and evaluating it. So the way the regulations frame the next point here is copy of any quizzes. Note it says any quizzes, so quizzes aren't required. And I know, Jill, you usually don't, it's not on the form right now, so you're definitely not getting quizzes, but they're not required to have them at all. So I don't think there's much we need to discuss there because they don't have to exist. So it does ask for a grading system, which we were talking about internally and saying, just let us know, you know, is it pass, fail? Is it, you know, a numeric ranking, whatever it is. I don't, you know, it seems like this might be one that we don't necessarily need to have in the future. Let us know what your grading system is, but it currently is part of the regulations. I don't know if there's any comment on that. And Jill, you're not getting any of those either, are you?
I have gotten some, but I do know that, you know, if a student doesn't pass, they go back and take it again. They're charged a fee. They can take it again and again and again until they pass.
Yeah.
So.
What is the grading system? Does anyone know? What does that look like?
I think they're looking for like a 70, 75.
Okay.
Is that a requirement? A 70, 75? For those who are teaching courses, like what do you?
I think that goes to the schools. I don't have any, I've never seen any requirement as far as what I've come across with the department. I think that's the individual school, perhaps. I mean, Jeff wanted to say something.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff, sorry.
I was just going to mention that the grading, like I don't know that that's relevant here. You know, if there's a couple quizzes that need to be passed through the course, ultimately this is a competency-based exam where if they're unable to pass the PSI test, then that's indicative of something perhaps related to the course content. We offer quizzes in our courses. Some of them don't even need to be taken, but they're there if you want to use them as practice. So.
Right. So I'm not certain that it's something we need to collect.
I mean, do we even need a test then at the end of the course? If you do your 60 hours, you take your course, you go take the PSI test, you pass or fail. I mean,
Well, currently they have to pass the PMP course in order to get the certificate to be able to test with PSI.
You know, and there's a lot of people, I'm not going to say a lot of people, but I do hear from students that say, I can't pass this test with my school. And
really?
Yeah.
Some do say that the test, Dearborn test, is harder than what they take with PSI. So, and others are the opposite. So I can't really make a judgment. My students.
Mm-hmm.
But does the department or the state have a minimum testing? As an example, is it 70 or is it 75?
I think that lies on the school.
Yeah, mine is 70. But there's two parts, they do two parts. They have to get at least a 70 on each.
Yeah, there's no state requirement for these.
Yeah, there's no. Huh.
Perhaps we should put one.
Something to think about, I think, because you don't
I think
want
though, in terms of when this information comes to Jill, so we're talking about what, in terms of when it comes in, it doesn't matter if it's pass, fail, 70, 75, whatever it is, the school just submits what their grading system is. They just explain what it is.
I don't often get a grading system.
Because that one isn't currently on the application.
Right.
And that's why. But now that we want to make sure right now in the interim that these items are submitted, what does the commission think that Jill should be looking at? Should it be, okay, because every school is going to be different, it sounds like. So as long as they submit something that says, I'm a pass fail, students have to get 70, whatever it is that sufficient? Just so we can get some input on this. Thoughts?
I mean, I know there's some instructors on here if they want to chime in on this, because maybe the commission doesn't, they're not looking at exams every day. And
well, the certificate that we use that goes to PSI to make the student eligible to test, for the state, asks for a grade. But I don't know if that's a standard certificate or just our schools. I'll check in on that, but we put the average grade on that certificate that they send to PSI in order to make an appointment to test.
I used to do the same thing. I had my own test. I didn't have a Dearborn test, and it would be a 70. And then I would put that on the certificate. They would apply with PSI. But I think this is overwhelming to try to dump this on Jill to be looking at all this.
Yeah.
I would propose streamlining the whole thing and then spending more time looking at the passing grades for each individual school and focusing on the schools that don't have the competency or aren't getting enough people prepared for the state exam. My job was to prepare people for the state exam. My job wasn't to make them geniuses. My job was to help them prepare for the state exam.
Exactly.
Okay, so for now, we have to include the grading system on there. It's in the regulations. So we'll have to just clarify, Jill, that it's, just send us what your grading policy is, right? Whether it's pass, fail, 70%, whatever it is. And that can be a quick thing that you don't even have to spend a lot of time taking it in, a look at. That sounds like the answer for now, as we bridge over.
I had one thought, apropos of what Terry said. I think this is much too much for Jill. Do we still have interns that come in the summer? We used to have interns.
I think there are a number that are coming in at some point. I don't know how many we have right now or what the plan is, but I think
Wondering whether this is something they could do, take us on a project to look at this, look at all the different submissions, take some of the burden off of Jill.
I mean, but the interns are only here for, a given period of time.
I know.
And
We're only
these things come in, and that's something I'm going to address when we get back down to that 10-day thing. I'm going to have a little.
Okay. All right. So the next one, the copy of affidavits and certificates to be issued. There actually are some articulated requirements there in the regulations, so I don't think we need to spend too much time on that. Those are pretty clear, that's what we were actually just talking about. What was the score? And Jill, you are getting those, right? You're taking a look at those.
I'm taking a look at the certificate.
Certificates,
yes,
right? What the school's giving the student.
What they're
right?
what the certificate will look like.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't think there's any issues with that bullet point. So that's good. And now, Jill, as far as proposed advertising and publicity go, I know we talked about this a little bit internally, but what are you getting, and how much do you really need here? Because you could take this.
I'm not getting much. I'm not getting much on that because it's I really don't get too much. They just say they're not going to, they're not going to have the class in their office. They're going to be they're all on Zoom now.
I think one of the things we talked about was like just a screenshot of if they have a website or if they, right?
Or Facebook page, they'll use that, or Instagram. I mean, I'm sure they're using everything across the board.
So if we wanted to make things easier for you and just be a little more specific, we could say something like that, like a screenshot of your website, your homepage, or
even the link,
Facebook.
The link to the web page, because then you could just go and look at it too, see what they're saying, what they're offering.
Okay. I know Jeff's hand is up.
Every state asks for a copy of your advertising and your publicity, et cetera, marketing materials. And in every state where we've submitted an application, I put the link to our website, which is not indicative of any advertising that we do. So while it's required now, in the future, I don't know, what are you trying to accomplish by requesting this? Because I'm not you want a copy of every one of my Google Ads campaigns and all 10 variations of the same ad that I run on Facebook for 3 weeks. If we were selling healthcare and Medicare, I have friends who do that. For big companies, every single ad and every variation of it's on file somewhere with the government and gets approved, and it can't be changed at all once it's been approved. I'm not sure what the states, as it relates to real estate education, is trying to accomplish by looking at the advertising. And by the way, every state that we submit our advertising links to, they all approve it because everyone's in the same boat. So if there's a real reason as to why they need to be reviewed, fine, but I think that it should be spelled out, whatever that reason is.
Quite well taken, Jeff. So
yeah. So yeah, I think for now, right, what we're just trying to do is boil something down for the current process to say, hey, if it's just send us the link, it's send us the link. But I think the bigger discussion down the road for revisions is more specifically do we want and or need, right? But I don't think that's the discussion today. But Cindy?
Yeah, I think this was done back in the day where the only way we marketed was mailing stuff out to people. And so there was a single flyer, but we're in the same boat as Jeff. We may put a Facebook ad, we may ask 12 local boards to send something out for us, and then I'd have to collect all of those. And then what in the world would Jill do with them, even when we send them? So I can't, the only thing that I could see is if you wanted to confirm that the instructor, was actually the instructor that I submitted, if it was like a way to double check the authenticity of, what was actually being promoted, it was what was sent. Other than that, I truly can't imagine what you all would do with this advertising material.
This is pretty antiquated anyhow, I think this request.
Right. So I do think for now, yeah. Yep.
I really don't understand how what's necessary? Why is it necessary? I might see maybe years and years and years ago, but I don't see it today. Nothing's a secret any longer.
Well, yeah, I mean, Cindy's point and Jeff's point are well taken on that. And it's, you know, obviously there is a duty for a fair representation in advertising, right? So there's certain things you would want to make sure that aren't out there that you might do if there was an investigation. If someone said, hey, look at this ad, look at these tuition costs or whatever this is, or this, they're making a guarantee of something, right? You want to make sure people aren't making these false guarantees to licensees or potential licensees. So, you know, there's the good intent on those things. But again, like everyone said, right, there's advertising is different now. And but I think for purposes of this discussion, what we can do for Jill is, yeah, it's a link. Is it a link? It's a link to your homepage, so we can at least look at that, and that should suffice for now, right, Jill? What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. This next one's a little tricky because this hasn't been requested right now, and it's seminars and indoctrination attended by instructors. So we might just want to, you know, indoctrination and clarify that we want their qualifications. Some listing of their qualifications, because that's something that's not included now. And I see Cindy's hand is up.
Oh. But what would you do with it? I mean, again, I mean, I could have a really lengthy list of things and be a terrible instructor. And there are people that are terrible instructors with really great lists.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that needs to be, that is required to be submitted. It is in the regulations. And I mean, I do think one of the problems is there's this conflict between the statute and the regulations about approval instructors. So we're not going to be going through and approving each one, but there should be standards for instructors, and that should be on file with the departments. So we know that they have met some standard.
So Paul, my suggestion would be that the instructor, when they submit it, that I tell you what my expertise is. So if I'm teaching on crumbling foundations and I'm explaining why Cindy Butts feels that she can teach on crumbling foundations. I mean, to me, one of the bigger issues is how many non-attorneys are teaching legal courses and answering like legal questions, you know, 100 Ways to Sunday on all this stuff. You know, what makes someone able to teach a legal course that's provided by the state?
Right.
Or, you know, provided as part of CE or even the mandatory course.
Yeah, I think it's fair, absolutely fair. So I know we have two more hands up.
Yeah, my concern, Cindy's question is exactly the right question. What do we do with it? And my concern is, you know, you ask for my qualifications. I have been a fisherman on Long Island Sound for 25 years. And, you know, that's as valid as any other qualification. I really don't know how, it's got to be objective, and it's got to not go to Jill, because I mean, there's only one Jill, and there's a huge amount of information and things to look at. You know, we can't dump these things on Jill.
Yeah, well, so it's going to have to be submitted with the course application. I don't know where else it could go. As far as scrutinizing it goes, you know, I don't know how much more Jill will be able to look into some of those things, but yeah, I don't know, Paulette or Jill, do you have any comment on any of that?
Well, you know, I usually get a resume, like when but it's not, I mean, this is P&P, okay? So you would get a resume of the instructor.
Okay.
But then like others have said, we have an attorney that comes in to teach the law portion. Some people have a math teacher that they know, or you know, math professor come in and teach the math, whatever, because some of these schools are very small, and the instructor is the owner of the school, and then they don't claim to be a master of all. So they bring in people along the way. But what I find is a big problem is you'll have a school that brings in people that are totally not qualified. They might be a salesperson. They may, you know, somebody very new. I've heard horror stories after the fact. So it's not something that I mean, I've had people call me and say, oh my God, you gotta get on this class right away because you
I've
gotta see
seen
what's
that
going
too.
on. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I've seen, and I've got a solution. So I've seen salespeople teaching brokers classes, and that doesn't seem right to me. So to me, if you want to put in a qualification, to me, a qualification is that in order to teach a class, you have to have passed that class. And then it's objective. And then Jill, you don't have to scratch your head and say, is a fisherman qualified to teach math? No, if the person has passed the broker's, examination or whatever it is, you're qualified to teach the broker's course.
So the law right now, right? So the statute says that the regulations cannot require approval of instructors, but there is still a regulation entitled Instructor Approved that does lay out standards for what those instructors have to have, right? And the standards, I mean, that regulation is still there. Those standards, for all intents and purposes, still exist. It's just that we're not allowed to go through and approve or deny specific instructors. Not to say we couldn't deny a course, however, because of inadequate instructors. And that requires 5 years as experience as a practicing broker or a professional designation from an institute or society in the field that the proposed instructor wishes to teach, or alternatively, experience in teaching a course in a formal education program or attendance at an accredited college or university. So there are some articulated standards in the pre-licensing regulations. It's just we're not allowed to do a checklist of this instructor's approved, this one is not.
So, I mean, I like that list. I've referred to that list many times. And then I'm always told, oh, but the state doesn't approve. So, but shouldn't they have to meet those guidelines if they're there? And I'm not approving. I mean, I'm not registering them. I'm not giving them any kind of credential, but I'm saying, oh, they met the guidelines, the basic guidelines. Because that's one of the biggest hangups I have, because I have brand new brokers or people that aren't even brokers yet that want to open up schools and be instructors. And frankly, it's just a recruiting because they're building a team. It's recruiting purely. If you spend 60 hours with somebody and you get all warm and fuzzy, you might just go work for them too.
Okay. I see Jeff's hand has been up for a while.
Yeah.
We're still on the same topic though, so that's a good thing. I want to start by saying this is a very impressive initiative. Being on the surface of a lot of different states' regs, familiar at a surface level rather, every state has their own version of antiquated rules. And by the time this is all done, Connecticut will probably become one of the leaders in the latest regs that other states should be looking towards. And throughout the call, I've kept mentioning, here's what other states are doing, because I think it's worth mentioning, like, hey, these are solved problems in many scenarios and by other states. So you don't have to keep coming up with, I say the commission doesn't have to keep coming up with new ideas here. But so that said, circling back to what Terry mentioned earlier about, there's two sides to this. What does it matter? Why don't we make sure that the schools are meeting certain passing requirements, or they go into probation where they have a certain time period to either improve or lose their privilege of teaching the course. And that might be an extreme measure to take. And then on the flip side of it, we've got a fisherman from Long Island on the commission who seems more than qualified to teach the course also. So there are states that have instructor minimums, like for example, Massachusetts, to become an instructor. It's been a while, but you have to pass a test, a PSI proctored exam. You have to audit a course that's being taught by some school, any school. Maybe there's other requirements, but every state has their own requirements. So instead of trying to come up with new ones, I think just looking to best practices, but also not excluding the fishermen, because they're sometimes just as qualified to teach this type of stuff with the right experience. So some states require the equivalent of like an ARELO or IDECC certification. And that makes sure that those instructors are familiar enough with the different types of learning methods that different students have. Or I think in Massachusetts, one of the questions was like, what's like a safe temperature that a classroom can be held at? Like there's some ridiculous questions out there that are required. But at the end of the day, whether it's a fisherman from Long Island or it's a real estate broker who also has an attorney's, they've been admitted to the bar, they could both be equally good instructors. I think it's worth pointing out, though, that there should be a certain minimum requirement for how much of the course is taught by guests. In a lot of our courses, we bring in a lot of guests, but they're never just, leave them in the room and call us when you're done. There's always like at least an instructor with them to help guide the conversation, make sure you stay on topic, make sure the conversation keeps moving, et cetera.
Okay, all good points. And I see Paulette's hand is up.
So are we, do we have like 2 minutes left? Is that?
I think the meeting invite went to 12 o'clock, but
12 o'clock? Okay.
And we actually don't have too much more left on the checklist to go through.
So I think I've been hearing a lot of good stuff, but I think at a minimum, I don't think we've talked about what's the minimum with respect to the seminars and indoctrination attended by instructors should be submitted right now for Jill to sort of like, is it some drop down boxes where someone checks off, yes, 5 years as a broker, or checks off another box. I think Paul had described what the qualifications are in our regulation. Is that what we're looking at? And then plus submit a resume. I think we need to get some input on what the minimum that Jill should be submitted right now. I know that we have a lot of work for us ahead for the future in terms of what it would look like. It sounds like it's a pretty important requirement, but right now, what's the minimum? We need to, I'd like to hear some input on what the minimum would look like for Jill, for someone to submit, for Jill to say, okay, that's checked, moving on.
Can it be what our regulation calls for?
So are they just checking a box and then not submitting anything? So
well, no, because there was a list of things that were required, but not.
But there's no proof behind it. So there's a list of things. So 5 years as a broker, are they providing proof for that? Or is it just they check off the box? Yes,
well,
I have 5 years.
I look on Kavoo and I see if they are a broker and when they got their license. So that's how I do it.
What have we done in the past? How were they doing before?
I have no idea.
Well, there's got to be some type of record. I mean, it's got to be something.
Paul, can you list again the other things, the other alternatives?
So it's 5 years as a practicing broker, a professional designation from an institute or society in the field the proposed instructor wishes to teach, or experience in teaching a course in a formal education program, or attendance in an accredited college or university extension instructor's seminar. So that's what's in the regulation.
Okay, so are these check boxes? Would that be sufficient that they're just checking a box that says, yes, I have this 5 years, or yes, check professional designation, or check experience in teaching in a formal or a college? Or are we saying that they now need to submit something to prove?
Wow.
What's that?
Or taken one college class on education, one college class.
I think it's taught a college class. No.
So it's either teaching a course in a formal education program, which isn't necessary. It just says formal education program. So that's teaching. And then the other is attendance at an accredited college or university's extension instructor's seminar. So that's some sort of specific seminar specifically for instructors, right?
I see that differently. To me, I went to Clark University. I took a seminar on education because for 2 seconds, I thought I wanted to be a teacher. That qualifies. I think that qualifies.
Yeah, if you went and you took that program specifically on being an instructor,
one class, one seminar, a seminar on it being an instructor.
That's what the regulation would allow.
So I guess my question again is, at a minimum, is it okay that a person will then just check a box and then you move on? Or are we saying if you check that box, you need to back it up with something that you need to submit? That's my question. Are we okay with just checking a box right now for the time being? Or are they checking a box and submitting a resume, checking a box and submitting
Submitting a
something
resume,
from their
yeah.
school?
They
that says,
send
"I
in
took
a
this course."
resume.
I mean, is this another thing where you could check a box and then you could have like 1 or 2 days a year where you go through and audit this sort of thing? So, you go back and you're like, all right, does this person have their 5 years of broker or no? Because at that point you've already like released them in the wild and they're teaching people. I mean, because we're trying to balance like manual burden for Jill versus also trying to hold people's feet to the fire that they're actually qualified to teach these classes. And so I don't know, it just seems like so much paperwork for her, and you would hope that people would be truthful in their submission of things.
Right, and we are not approving, so we can't approve them. So we're just looking at what's the minimum that we are requiring that they, as a submission. Because even if they submit something that says, I've took this course, and then we wouldn't do an audit, because what's the audit going to do for us? Because we can't say, uh-oh, you didn't take the class, deny, because we can't. Right now, we can't. There isn't anything that says that we're not approving them. So that's where we're at with that.
I think we're also looking not to decrease the bar, but to raise the bar too. We've got to be careful of our decision here.
So if we're not approving them, yet we have this list of criteria that we like them to meet, can we still put that out there? This is what we need for an instructor to have experience. We're not approving them. We're not giving them anything, but this is what the instructor needs for now.
I like the checklist because they're self-policing, and they see that if they're not able to check a box, you hope that 9 out of 10 of them are going to coach themselves out.
I mean, legally, Paul and Paulette, if we have this list and we can put been a broker for 5 years or taught in a, at a community college, whatever it says there, put those out in a bullet, does that hold water?
So these standards are still here. They're still in the regulation.
Okay, so
They're
can we
still there.
have standards
And
without
if you're not
approving?
You're not approving individual instructors though, right? So I think the check boxes are a good solution here. You're putting out what the standards are and we're going from there.
So if they don't meet the standards, we say what? You don't meet the
Nothing.
standard, right? Because I'm not saying you met the standards, you're approved, right? I'm not saying that. Even if they meet the
We can
standards,
say you didn't check one of the boxes, you'll need to check one of the boxes. But that's all that we should say.
I mean, I like to have that because I have something right now where I really just.
And I wish I had seen, and we had some legislative history kicking around, but recently, but there was nothing about the change in the legislations happened in 1982 or 84. I couldn't find any legislative history about why they said you can't approve instructors. But I mean, the bottom line though still is we do have course approval, right? You have course approval authority, and you do have some standards for instructors. So, I mean, there's still these laws out here. There's still this regulation out here. So I think putting check boxes makes a lot of sense.
Let's do it.
I think Jeff had something. Oh, he put his hand down.
I was just going to second, I think who just said that, Paul, just use check boxes for now. When people are looking at applications, there's a part of it that's going to deter some people if they don't check one of those boxes. But then at some point in the future, if there's some type of regulations that contemplate enforcement actions, it can be used as representations that were made. So just as when you audit students and ask for certificates, you can ask them for their proof of 5 years of activity or that they've taken a course, et cetera, as part of the documentation they need to provide.
And then we can make it mandatory that they check one of those boxes. And I think, isn't there, I haven't looked at the application or the form, so they have to sign, right? Are they signing?
Well, the school
away?
is, the school is
Right,
signing.
somebody's signing that
Right.
this.
Yes, yes.
But wait a minute, doesn't an application I would think an application must be complete in order for us to accept it. Complete means filled out completely, including if there's a checkbox that needs to be, it's got to be checked. Or it's an incomplete application.
But it's a programming thing, so sometimes you can leave something blank and you can still continue through the process. So what we're saying is we can make it such that you have to check a box and move before you can move along.
Love it.
Okay. All right, so I know we're getting shorter on time here, and there's really only a couple more points on that list, and they're pretty basic ones. So and this is one that is just, it's required for them to submit right now. It's locations of all the classrooms. So we have it on file, I think, but there's also some language in there about approving locations. You know, I don't know that it's necessary for department and the commission to approve all classroom locations, but for now it's something we do. We collected on this list anyways. And I know, Jill, you had some comment on locations or something, right? The 10 days.
They're not supposed to have a class in their office. It's supposed to be, you know, as to not recruit.
Yep, there's a few prohibited locations. There's offices, so real estate offices, appraisers' offices, and then other, I think the other word is franchise offices. So those are all prohibited locations. Okay, and then the names and addresses of all instructors to be used, just another thing we're collecting. So there's not too much controversy on either one of those. Okay, and Jill, did you have any comment on the final checkbox there? The following must be submitted to the commission at least 10 days prior to the first course. Did you have anything on that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's enough time because 10 days, I mean, I can have a school submit 8 courses. I mean, they're not all, I mean, this is just P&P we're talking about right now, but I don't think 10 days is enough. I think it should be, I mean, I was looking at appraisal, and appraisal has, they submit courses like in January 15th, and they get approved by March 15th. They have 3 submission dates. And I don't think that's asking too much, because if you're in the business to, if you have a real estate school and you're going to teach a P&P class, that's not something you're just doing on the fly. That's a pretty serious class. I mean, it's the most detailed class that anyone's going to take to get a real estate license. So I think somebody's going to know that in advance. I think we should go, I mean, I know it says 10 days now, but I think we should go to, you know, like what appraisal does. You can submit 3 times a year, and we have, you know, ample time to approve them. And maybe there's an intern around at that time, or I just think 10 days is a lot, because there's always things every day. There's something pressing that needs to be addressed.
Right. There's no predictability to it, right? It just, you
It should be
submit
at
this.
it should be at the department's discretion.
Well, you submit this course application, and then the way the regulations are written are bizarre in this way. You submit your course application, then there's this separate provision about this 10 days, you have to submit this other stuff. And it just logically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not a clear process for people. So I think that's something that will have to be definitely addressed. And the appraisal regulations do a good job of spelling something out. So we'll have to take a look.
Oh, that's been, this is a problem in the past.
What they do is they send me the link to the class in the real estate mailbox. They send the link to the class so I can pop on. And, you know, in getting something like that too far in advance, it gets lost because there's so many other emails. So I always tell people, if you can email me the day before, because then I can look at my schedule and pop on to a class.
Okay.
Because this 10 days could be as little as 7 days. And you got weekends, you've got holidays, and that's occurred. And we have had people if they could time it right, coincidentally, come in front of us and see if we can get a course approved immediately.
Okay. All right. And the next page down is the continuing ed checklist. Most of these are the same, so we don't have to go through all of these. It's yeah, but the last two bullet points here, tuition and related costs and Aurelo certification, are not included on the pre-licensing side of things. And I know, I just want to check with Jill here. Are you getting both of these documents? Are they being captured?
The tuition?
Yeah.
No.
It's not. Okay, because it's not on the form, but it's on our instructions, I think, but it's not on the form. And I think,
Instructors are not on the form either. They don't ask who's instructing, which would be good to have it on the form. It should be on the form.
right. But you are getting the Aurelo certification for distance. They are submitting that.
If it's an Aurelo, yeah.
If it's distance, period, it needs to be Aurelo for continuing ed.
For continuing ed, if it's distance learning, well, what do you call distance learning? Is that a Zoom class? Is that distance learning? So I guess I'm
Yes.
not getting them on all.
No, Zoom is live virtual, isn't it? I thought distance
is.
was like the CE shop,
So distance is asynchronous. Is it?
asynchronous. Okay, so not Zoom.
All right, so that's going to be one of the issues, right? And I think this has been batted around. I don't want to bring up another debate on all of this. So we can leave it at that, but you're getting Aurelo for asynchronous case
Yes,
courses. Okay.
yes.
Cindy has her hand up.
You get an actual certificate saying it's Aurelo certified?
Yes.
Okay.
Does that expire?
I thought those were
Yes.
super expensive to do and time consuming.
How
They
long
do,
is the
they do expire. They run basically 2 years, but
Three.
sometimes 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay, but sometimes, like, let's say, Jeff, you have a course that's Aurelo approved and you let somebody else use it.
I don't have experience with that because we don't let other schools use our courses, but the Aurelo certification, historically, the expiration date on that matches the expiration date of our course in the Connecticut system. So when we get the Aurelo certification renewed, and to Cindy's point, yeah, it's expensive and time consuming and a pain in the butt, and I used to hate it, but the more reps I've gotten through it, the more I realize that it's raising the bar on the level of quality overall of a course. They don't check to make sure that you're saying the correct things, but they check to make sure that you're structuring your course correctly.
So Jeff, to the point that Terry had, where you could do a 3-hour course in 20 minutes,
Mhm.
I thought part of the Aurelo certification was there was no way you could do a 3-hour course in 20 minutes, or is that not part of the Aurelo certification?
One part of the Aurelo review process is there's a checkbox that says, does this, this is not verbatim, but does where it's being offered require some sort of time justification? And if it does, then you have to submit time studies, or you have to submit some type of proof that it will take this long to complete the course. Now, if you're submitting it that way, there's the loophole here is that Connecticut doesn't require, there's no regs that say like, hey, you have to follow what Aurelo approved it as, because it's a setting on your platform on, how quickly you want people to move through it. And usually, I forget we don't have reading-based courses, but there's some formula where it's like 60 words per minute. So if your course is 6,000 words, it takes however many minutes based on that formula. And that's how they determine sometimes with the clock justification. Kind of depends how it's.
So I'm not clear. You think that it says that you have to get an Aurelo certification, but you don't have to follow it? So that's the loophole, is it's not being followed?
Well, if I go and get a course Aurelo approved, and then I apply to have that course in Connecticut, there's no current enforcement on if you don't follow Aurelo's instructions. It says you need to be approved. I think that might be the issue, is that, okay, we're approved, we got it approved, but we're delivering it in a different way than it was approved for.
Well, my comment on that is why require the certification if it doesn't matter if you follow it or not? You know, and I know your company does, but for the companies that may be getting the certification and then opt to not follow the reason that the requirement's probably in there in the first place. You know,
there's probably some language in the current regs that I haven't read that say you just have to have the Arella certification. You don't have to follow how the course was certified. That would be my guess.
Well, it says it's required. It doesn't go into much more detail than that. You have to have the certification. But if you're teaching the course in a way that's different than what it was certified for, that would seem to be a violation. So it's a different course. If you're not teaching it the way it was certified, that's a different course. I don't think you need more language than what's there to take some sort of action against the course. And there is in the CE regulations, there is some language in there about board action withdrawing, being able to withdraw or remove a course for failure to meet the requirements of the CE regulations. So, I don't believe the department's audited any classes or courses on this, but I think there's enough in the regs for them to do that.
So I've never audited an Arella course because the Arella courses are not mandatory CE or they're not pre-licensing. So an Arella course, to get this straight, is an asynchronous course that if ABC school gets an Arella certificate to teach a course, can that school take that course and give it to Terry's school and say, Terry, now you can teach this course. We're lending you our course.
That's what's currently done.
It is.
All of the boards that use the CE shop are essentially in some format, I think, licensing or partnering. Or I shouldn't say CE shop, and they're just the topic at hand at the moment. But there are a number of, I think, Hondros, maybe McKissick. There's a few providers that will license or partner with schools, associations, et cetera, to let them use their courses.
So what those schools do is they say, okay, I'm going to let ABC school use my course. Then they send me an email with the Arella certificate with like 20 schools listed. All these schools are approved for this course now. There's no application or anything from the schools. They're just granting permission.
Okay.
To all these.
See, Terry's hand is up.
I just want to say, with the Arella, my understanding is that you have to check off whether it's a timed course or not a timed course. I do know that a few years back with the McKissick course, by the way, my record is 13 minutes for a 3-hour ethics course with McKissick, and it's 20 minutes for the mandatory state law class with CE shop. And it's because those courses weren't timed. I have to take 15 hours a year for my mortgage license. All those courses are timed. I can't move forward. I cannot finish a 3-hour class in less than 3 hours because they're timed courses. So the best thing to do is just require that the classes are timed. And just one other thing, someone had mentioned about CE shop not having live virtual. They are doing a live virtual of the racial bias class for $69. Mm-hmm. So that's the only one that's doing live virtual. Of the rest are the distance learning.
If I could clarify a point about the application, I pulled one up as we were talking, and there's a section in the application that has a time study section. And one of the questions is, will this course be offered in some jurisdictions without the timing device? So it's possible that they get it approved with the device, with the caveat saying that there are some jurisdictions it may not be allowed. It may not be required. So it's kind of a gray area. I think that's where the state has to step in to say, if it's a 3-hour course, it's a 60-minute hour or it's a 50-minute hour. And that's for live or asynchronous. A lot of states do it that way. They'll look at 3 hours as 2.5 hours because it's 10 minutes less for each hour.
All right. Anything further on this portion of it? I don't know, Jill or Paulette, do you have any comments or anything further? On the Arello? Okay, so we're at 11:52 here. And I just want to summarize a few things, I guess, of where we're at. So I think on the department's side of things, what we're going to do is try to get this, the application process right now, the forms updated, right? That's a short-term fix to make sure we're including everything that's required in the regulations. I think we've gotten some provided clarity on a few points to make things easier for Jill, even though there may be a few more documents coming her way. I think we've kind of got it to a good point where hopefully those things aren't too confusing or burdensome. And then after that, the process would be getting this towards e-licensing, right, on that e-licensing system. That would be the next step. And then the big discussion after that is the regulations and statute, which is going to require more than just this discussion, right? Because there's so many of those elements, the things Cindy mentioned, the things everyone's mentioned. So, but I think we have a good foundation for a lot of that stuff. So with that, I just want to open it up to any final questions or comments that people might have.
Well, I want to say that I'm happy that some of these, some instructors came on to give us some, so a little bit, expand the knowledge, expand the conversation. And I think they're really helpful what they had to say. And I would like to, hopefully include them in future discussion or even a working group on this.
Yeah, definitely very valuable. Definitely. All right. Anything else? I can turn it back to, I don't know what we have to do next, but to end this, turn it back to Chairman Castonguay.
I want to thank all of you for participating. It's been something that probably we should have done a long time ago, but it's time. So Paul, you did an excellent job, and I really appreciate all the work and effort that you did. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All
And
right. I'm sorry.
We got to mention Terry Joe too.
Okay.
Always.
Oh, Terry, please. Oh, Terry, we have nothing.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you'll be contacting us, keeping us up on what's going on.
Yes,
thank
absolutely.
you again. And thank you again, Paul.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Great job.
Happy spring.
Happy spring to you.